The Galactic Dominion had ruled unopposed for 3 millennia when humanity first submitted their petition for membership. Ambassador Zerion of the Valfari Empire still remembered that day with crystalline clarity, though he would later wish he could forget it entirely. The human delegation had arrived in their modest vessel, barely qualifying as a starship by galactic standards, carrying documents written on actual paper, an archaic medium that caused ripples of amusement throughout the Dominion Council chambers. "Honored members of the Galactic Dominion," the lead human ambassador had said, her voice barely carrying across the vast chamber designed to intimidate lesser species. "We come before you as representatives of the human species from the planet Earth, located in what you classify as Sector 7, Zone 12, Grid Reference Theta 7739. We humbly request consideration for associate membership status within your esteemed organization." The laughter that followed was not cruel by intention, merely reflexive. Here was a species that had barely achieved faster-than-light travel, whose entire military consisted of chemical-propelled projectile weapons and primitive nuclear devices, asking to join an alliance that commanded the power of artificial suns and could reshape solar systems at will. Their technology was so primitive that several council members initially mistook their presentation for some form of elaborate performance art. Zerion himself had been among those who found the human request endearing in its naivety. The Valfari had achieved interstellar flight when humans were still discovering fire. Their own empire commanded 17 star systems and maintained a fleet of dreadnoughts that could glass entire continents from orbit. To them, as to most species in the Dominion, humanity appeared to be a quaint curiosity, a species of hairless bipeds who had somehow stumbled into space travel through what could only be described as incredible fortune. The Dominion's response had been crafted with what they considered generous condescension. "The request of the human species has been reviewed and found premature," High Chancellor Vexai had pronounced from his crystalline throne. "Your species demonstrates admirable ambition, but lacks the technological sophistication, military capacity, and cultural development necessary for even associate membership. We encourage you to continue your development for another perhaps 500 standard years, at which point you may resubmit your application for reconsideration." What followed was a masterclass in diplomatic humiliation disguised as benevolent guidance. The humans were assigned a mentor species, the Zilani, a race barely above baseline themselves, who had been granted membership primarily because their homeworld contained useful mining resources. Earth was classified as a protected developing world, which in practice meant that humanity was forbidden from expanding beyond their immediate solar system without explicit Dominion permission. "Think of it as a probationary period," Chancellor Vexay had explained, with the tone one might use when speaking to a particularly slow child. "We have established monitoring stations throughout your system to ensure your continued safe development. Any attempts at unauthorized expansion or military buildup will be met with corrective measures." The human delegation had accepted these terms with what appeared to be grateful humility. They bowed appropriately, used all the correct honorifics, and departed with expressions of deep appreciation for the Dominion's wisdom and patience. Their ambassador had even presented the Chancellor with what she called a token of Earth's respect, a simple wooden box containing what appeared to be dirt from their homeworld. "How charmingly primitive," the Chancellor had murmured, accepting the gift with barely concealed amusement. The box was later placed in a storage facility along with thousands of similar trinkets from countless petitioning species, forgotten almost immediately. For the next 50 standard years, humanity appeared to embody everything the Dominion expected from a properly managed developing species. They remained within their assigned boundaries, made no attempts at military expansion, and regularly submitted the required cultural and technological progress reports. These reports painted a picture of a species slowly advancing along predictable lines, improving their computational systems, developing cleaner energy sources, gradually expanding their presence within their own solar system. The Dominion's monitoring stations reported exactly what their operators expected to see: a species of approximately 8 billion individuals spread across a single planet and a few minor colonies on neighboring worlds, equipped with technology that remained centuries behind galactic standards. Their military, such as it was, consisted mainly of orbital defense platforms armed with primitive kinetic weapons and a small fleet of interplanetary vessels that wouldn't have posed a threat to a single Dominion patrol cruiser. What the monitors failed to detect, what their sophisticated sensors were never programmed to look for, was the transformation taking place in the depths of human consciousness itself. The rejection by the Galactic Dominion had not broken humanity's spirit, as it had with so many other species. Instead, it had crystallized something that had been building in the human psyche for centuries, a recognition that their survival and dignity depended not on the approval of others, but on their willingness to transcend their own limitations. The humans who returned from that first diplomatic mission carried with them not just the humiliation of rejection, but a profound understanding of what they needed to become. "We were weak because we thought like the weak," Admiral Sarah Chen would later write in her classified memoirs. "We approached them seeking permission to exist as equals, when what we should have been doing was making ourselves impossible to ignore." The transformation began quietly, in research facilities buried deep beneath Earth's surface and in installations hidden within the asteroid belts of their outer system. While the Dominion's sensors tracked surface-level industrial activity and monitored conventional military installations, they remained blind to the revolutionary work taking place in shielded laboratories where human scientists were not trying to catch up to galactic technology, but to leapfrog it entirely. The key insight had come from Dr. Marcus Reeves, a theoretical physicist who had been present during the original diplomatic mission. "They think of technology in linear terms," he explained to the newly formed Terra Defense Council. "Each advancement building incrementally on the last. But human innovation has always been about revolutionary leaps, finding entirely new approaches that make the old ones obsolete. Instead of trying to develop more powerful engines to match Dominion speeds, human engineers began working on spatial folding techniques that would make conventional faster-than-light travel seem pedestrian. Rather than building bigger weapons to compete with galactic arsenals, they focused on developing technologies that would make size and raw power irrelevant. Most crucially, they abandoned the galactic paradigm of treating each world as an isolated unit and began thinking in terms of distributed, interconnected systems that could function as a unified organism. The philosophy that guided this transformation became known as the Prometheus doctrine, named after the mythological figure who stole fire from the gods. Its central tenet was deceptively simple: the man who destroys his weak self can never be destroyed by others. This was not merely about technological advancement, but about a fundamental shift in how humanity understood itself and its place in the universe. "We spent too long trying to be worthy of their respect." Dr. Elena Vasquez, head of the Prometheus project, explained to the secret council that now guided Earth's true development. What we should have been doing was making their respect irrelevant. The process of destroying the weak self was both literal and metaphorical. On the literal level, humanity systematically identified and eliminated every aspect of their civilization that made them dependent on external validation or approval. Trade relationships that required them to accept subordinate status were quietly terminated. Scientific exchanges that forced them to share their discoveries while receiving only condescending guidance in return were abandoned. Cultural programs that portrayed human achievement as quaint or primitive were systematically replaced with narratives that celebrated human uniqueness and potential. On the metaphorical level, the transformation was even more profound. Humanity began to see itself not as a young species seeking acceptance from elder civilizations, but as a unique form of consciousness that brought something genuinely new to the galaxy. They stopped measuring their worth against galactic standards and began developing their own criteria for success and progress. This shift in self-perception had practical consequences that the Dominion's monitoring systems were not designed to detect. Human research projects that had been aimed at achieving galactic standard technologies were redirected toward developing uniquely human solutions to universal problems. Military doctrine that had focused on defending Earth from hypothetical threats was replaced with strategies for projecting human influence throughout the galaxy. Most importantly, the entire structure of human government and society was quietly reorganized around the principle of absolute independence from external control or interference. The Zelani, assigned as humanity's mentor species, remained blissfully unaware of these developments. Their quarterly reports to the Dominion painted a picture of steady but unremarkable progress. The humans continue to advance within expected parameters, their latest assessment read. Minor improvements in computational efficiency and energy production, some expansion of asteroid mining operations, but nothing approaching industrial scale. Military capabilities remain minimal and defensive in nature. Cultural development shows increasing focus on historical study and philosophical reflection, which we interpret as preparation for eventual integration into galactic civilization. What the Zelani interpreted as philosophical reflection was actually something far more dangerous. humanity was developing an entirely new framework for understanding power, conflict, and survival that owed nothing to galactic precedent. Human philosophers, working in conjunction with military strategists and technological innovators, were creating a doctrine of absolute self-determination that would have horrified the Dominion leadership if they had been capable of comprehending it. The transformation was not without its internal conflicts. A significant portion of humanity still believed that accommodation and gradual integration offered the safest path forward. These voices, led by the diplomatic corps and supported by many civilian leaders, argued that the Dominion's power was simply too overwhelming to challenge directly. "We're talking about civilizations that can move stars," Director James Harrison of the diplomatic corps warned during the one heated debate in the secret council chambers. "Even if we could match their individual technologies, we're one species against thousands. The mathematics of survival dictate cooperation, not confrontation." But these voices were increasingly drowned out by those who had embraced the Prometheus doctrine completely. "The mathematics of survival," Admiral Chen responded to Harrison's concerns. "Change when you stop accepting the other side's definition of the game. They think in terms of overwhelming force because that's all they've ever needed. But overwhelming force is useless if you can't find your target, and irrelevant if your target strikes at the foundations of your power rather than its symptoms." The debate was ultimately settled not by argument but by results. As the first Prometheus technologies came online, spatial fold generators that could move objects instantaneously across interstellar distances, quantum computers that could process information faster than galactic supercomputers, materials that could reorganize themselves at the molecular level, it became clear that humanity was indeed on the verge of achieving something unprecedented. By the 40th year after their original rejection, Earth had become something that existed nowhere else in the galaxy, a single-species civilization that was simultaneously completely integrated and completely independent. Every human, from the researchers in the deepest laboratories to the farmers working Earth's remaining agricultural zones, understood their role in humanity's transformation. More importantly, they understood that this transformation was not just about survival, but about demonstrating that conscious beings need not accept limitations imposed by others, no matter how powerful those others might seem. The final phase of humanity's secret development was the most audacious: the construction of what they called the Terra Network. Using a combination of quantum entanglement and spatial folding, human engineers had created an instantaneous communication and coordination system that linked not just Earth's various installations, but every human presence throughout the solar system. The network was more than a communication system. It was a distributed consciousness that allowed humanity to function as a single organism while maintaining individual autonomy. When the network came fully online, humanity achieved something that the Galactic Dominion had never imagined possible: perfect coordination without centralized control. Every human could access the collective knowledge and capability of the species while retaining complete freedom of thought and action. It was democracy and efficiency combined at a level that made even the most advanced galactic AIs seem crude by comparison. The test of this new capability came sooner than expected. Dominion monitoring stations detected what appeared to be a routine expansion of human asteroid mining operations. But something about the energy signatures triggered automated alert systems. A Dominion inspection team, led by Captain Zexhai of the Valfari Imperial Navy, was dispatched to investigate. What Captain Zexhai found changed everything. The asteroid mining operation was revealed to be something unprecedented in galactic history: a complete artificial world, constructed using technologies that Dominion scientists couldn't even classify, let alone understand. The structure was simultaneously larger and smaller than its appearance suggested. Spatial folding techniques had created interior spaces that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. But more disturbing than the technological achievement was the human response to the inspection. For the first time in 50 years, humanity abandoned the pose of respectful submission that had characterized all previous interactions. "Captain Zexhai," the human representative had said, and the captain noticed immediately that the human was no longer using the traditional honorifics or speaking with the deferential tone that Dominion protocols required from subject species. "We appreciate your interest in our activities, but we must inform you that this facility is not subject to Dominion inspection under the current terms of our arrangement." The captain had been momentarily speechless. In 3 centuries of service, no subject species had ever questioned Dominion authority to inspect their activities. "I'm afraid you misunderstand your situation," he had finally replied. The protection status of your species grants the Dominion unrestricted access to monitor your development. Compliance is not optional. The human smile had been perfectly polite and absolutely terrifying. Captain, I believe you misunderstand our situation. The protection status was accepted by a previous human administration under specific circumstances. Those circumstances have changed. We are hereby formally notifying the Dominion that we no longer require or desire protected status. What followed was the first direct challenge to Dominion authority in over 1,000 years. Captain Zexahai, following standard protocol, ordered his battle group to take control of the human facility by force. What happened next would be studied by military analysts across the galaxy for decades to come. The human facility didn't resist the Dominion attack. It simply wasn't there when the weapons struck. Spatial folding had moved the entire structure into dimensional spaces that Dominion weapons couldn't even target. Meanwhile, every Dominion ship in the battle group found their systems simultaneously compromised by intrusion programs that made their most sophisticated security measures look like children's toys. In less than 10 minutes, a full Dominion battle group, ships that could have conquered entire star systems, was floating helplessly in space while humans politely explained that they would be returned to Dominion space unharmed, but that any future military incursions would be met with more decisive responses. The message that accompanied the disabled battle group's return was simple and revolutionary. Humanity hereby withdraws from all previous agreements with the Galactic Dominion and claims full sovereignty over all territories and resources within the Sol system. We bear no ill will toward the Dominion or its member species, but we will no longer recognize any external authority over human affairs. The reaction in the Dominion capital was one of stunned disbelief followed by predictable rage. No species in recorded history had ever successfully defied Dominion authority. The very concept seemed impossible, like a single ant declaring independence from the colony. High Chancellor Vexai's response was swift and absolute. The human species has demonstrated that they are unfit for civilized coexistence. They will be reduced to a pre-spaceflight state and placed under direct Dominion administration until they learn proper respect for galactic order. The order went out to the Dominion's most powerful fleet. Operation Correction would be the largest military deployment in centuries, designed not just to defeat humanity but to make their rebellion an object lesson for any other species that might harbor thoughts of independence. As the Dominion mobilized for war, humanity made their final preparations for the confrontation that would determine not just their survival, but the future of conscious freedom throughout the galaxy. The weak, supplicating species that had once begged for acceptance was gone, transformed into something the galaxy had never seen before. A civilization that had transcended not just its own limitations, but the very concept of limitation itself. The politeness was ending. The real test was about to begin. Part 2. The Mathematics of Revolution. Admiral Sarah Chen stood in the command center of the Terra Network's primary node. Watching this display showed the largest military deployment in galactic history converging on the Sol system. 2,000 Dominion vessels, including super dreadnoughts capable of cracking planets and reality-warping weapons that could unravel the fabric of space itself, were approaching at maximum speed with a single objective: the complete subjugation of humanity. Final force estimate, she requested from the network's tactical division. The response came not through traditional communication channels, but directly through the quantum neural interface that linked her consciousness to humanity's collective intelligence. In the microseconds it took her neurons to process the thought, she had access to detailed analyses compiled by millions of human minds working in perfect coordination. The numbers were staggering. The Dominion fleet represented the combined military might of over 300 species, including technologies developed across millennia of galactic conquest. Their flagship, the Eternal Dominion, was itself larger than Earth's moon and carried weapons that could sterilize entire solar systems. The mathematics of conventional warfare suggested that humanity's chances of survival were essentially zero. But Admiral Chen smiled as she absorbed this information, because humanity was no longer thinking in terms of conventional warfare. Network consensus on strategic approach? She queried. The answer came with the same instantaneous clarity. Prometheus paradigm, full implementation. The plan that had been refined over decades of secret preparation was elegant in its simplicity and revolutionary in its implications. Instead of trying to match the Dominion's overwhelming force, humanity would demonstrate that force itself was an obsolete concept when applied against a truly evolved consciousness. Elena Vasquez materialized beside Chen through the network's holographic interface, her image projected from the research facility on Mars where she was overseeing the final technical preparations. All systems are green, Admiral. The fold space generators are operating at 127% of theoretical maximum, the quantum consciousness buffers are stable, and our distributed defense grid is ready for full activation. The technology that Dr. Arbeen, Vasquez referred to so casually, represented achievements that made humanity's original assessment of their capabilities seem laughably conservative. The fold space generators could move objects, including entire planets, through dimensions that existed outside normal space-time. The quantum consciousness buffers allowed human minds to operate at speeds that made conventional AI seem glacial. The distributed defense grid was humanity's ultimate expression of the Prometheus doctrine, a system that existed everywhere and nowhere simultaneously, making it impossible to target or destroy through conventional means. But perhaps the most crucial element was something that couldn't be quantified by any known measure: humanity's absolute unity of purpose. The network had achieved what no galactic civilization had ever accomplished: perfect coordination without the loss of individual autonomy. Every human being, from the scientists in the deepest research facilities to the children in Earth schools, understood their role in what was about to unfold, and had freely chosen to participate. The first Dominion vessels entered the Sol system's outer boundary and immediately encountered something unprecedented in their experience. Nothing happened. There were no defensive installations to destroy, no military formations to engage, no clear targets of any kind. The system appeared exactly as their intelligence reports had described it: a minor stellar cluster with a few inhabited worlds and minimal industrial development. Admiral Korthak, commanding the Dominion fleet, had fought in 17 major campaigns and conquered 43 worlds. He understood the psychology of subject species facing overwhelming force. They either surrendered immediately upon seeing the size of his fleet, or they made desperate last stands with whatever weapons they possessed. He had never encountered a species that simply ignored his presence. "Scan for cloaked installations," he ordered his tactical staff. "These humans are more primitive than our initial assessment suggested, but they're not completely suicidal. They must have some kind of defense prepared." The scans revealed nothing that Dominion sensors could classify as threatening. There were indeed structures throughout the system that didn't match their previous intelligence. Massive installations on asteroids, artificial constructs in orbit around the gas giants, and what appeared to be some kind of industrial complex floating in the space between planets. But none of these registered as military targets according to Dominion threat assessment protocols. This was humanity's first demonstration of post-conventional thinking. The installations that Dominion sensors dismissed as non-threatening were actually components of a defensive system so advanced that it didn't register on equipment designed to detect traditional weapons. The network had learned to think in terms of probability manipulation rather than force projection, of strategic reality alteration rather than tactical superiority. Admiral Korthak's frustration was evident in his communications with the Dominion capital. "The humans appear to have abandoned all defensive preparations," he reported. "Our intelligence was either completely wrong about their capabilities, or they've suffered some kind of civilizational collapse since our last contact. Request permission to begin planetary bombardment." High Chancellor Vexai's response was immediate. "Granted. Begin with their primary world. Make it thorough." What happened next redefined the galactic understanding of what was possible in warfare. As the Dominion fleet prepared to fire, humanity implemented the first phase of their response: selective dimensional displacement. The weapons fired normally, their targeting systems locked onto Earth exactly as intended, but the planet they struck was not the Earth that contained humanity's population. Using fold space technology, human engineers had created what they called probability shadows, alternate versions of reality that existed in parallel dimensions. When the Dominion's planet-killing weapons struck, they hit an Earth that had been evacuated to shadow space nanoseconds before impact. The real Earth, containing 8 billion human beings and the core of human civilization, remained untouched in a dimensional fold that existed between heartbeats. From the Dominion fleet's perspective, their weapons had struck successfully. Earth appeared to be burning, its atmosphere ionizing under the massive energy bombardment, its surface glowing white-hot under the sustained assault. But their sensors also detected something impossible. No debris, no evidence of population centers being destroyed, no energy signatures of a civilization dying. "Sir," the Dominion Fleet science officer reported with barely concealed confusion, The planet shows signs of successful bombardment, but we're not detecting any of the expected secondary effects. No atmospheric escape, no tectonic disruption, no electromagnetic signature collapse. Admiral Korthak stared at the tactical displays, his 3 centuries of military experience providing no framework for understanding what he was seeing. Are our weapons malfunctioning? No, sir. All systems show normal function. We're hitting the target, but the target is... The science officer paused, struggling to find words for something beyond his comprehension. The target appears to be absorbing our bombardment without taking damage. This was humanity's second demonstration. Energy absorption and redirection. The damaged Earth that the Dominion was attacking was actually a sophisticated energy collection system, designed to capture and store the massive amounts of power that the Dominion fleet was pouring into it. Every gigawatt of destructive energy was being channeled into humanity's own systems, powering technologies that were now operating at levels that made their original capabilities seem trivial. The message that reached Admiral Korthak 15 minutes into the bombardment was delivered through his own communication systems, despite the fact that no human vessel was anywhere near his flagship. Admiral Korthak. The voice was calm, professional, and somehow familiar, though he was certain he had never heard it before. This is Admiral Sarah Chen, speaking for the human species. We want to thank you for the energy donation. Your bombardment has allowed us to charge our systems to levels we hadn't previously been able to achieve. We're now ready to begin the next phase of our response. The communication was impossible on multiple levels. Dominion command ships were equipped with the most sophisticated security systems in the galaxy, designed to prevent exactly this kind of intrusion. More disturbing still was the implication that humanity had somehow turned their bombardment into an advantage. "This is Admiral Korthak of the Galactic Dominion," he responded, his voice tight with anger and confusion. "You will surrender immediately or face complete annihilation." The human's response was tinged with something that might have been amusement. "Admiral, I think there may be some confusion about the current tactical situation. Please observe." What Admiral Korthak observed redefined his understanding of the possible. Every Dominion vessel in his fleet, 2,000 ships representing the pinnacle of galactic military technology, suddenly found themselves somewhere else. Not destroyed, not damaged, but simply relocated to positions scattered throughout the galaxy, each ship alone in empty space with no idea how they had been moved or where they now were. The flagship, Eternal Dominion, found itself in orbit around a star in a completely different spiral arm, its navigation systems unable to determine their location or plot a course home. Similar reports flooded in from every vessel in the fleet. They had been dispersed across hundreds of light years in what appeared to be an instantaneous transportation event that violated every known law of physics. "As you can see," Admiral Chen's voice continued, "reaching every Dominion ship simultaneously despite the impossible distances between them. We have developed certain capabilities that weren't included in your intelligence assessments. Your fleet has been relocated to positions throughout the galaxy where they can do no immediate harm. Your crews are uninjured and your ships are undamaged, but your ability to threaten Earth or any other human installation has been temporarily suspended." Admiral Korthak's tactical staff was in complete chaos. Their sensors showed no sign of the technology that could have accomplished such a displacement. More importantly, their analysis suggested that the energy requirements for moving 2,000 starships across galactic distances simultaneously would exceed the total power output of multiple stars. "This is impossible," Admiral Korthak transmitted on an open channel, hoping that some human authority would respond to reason. "No species possesses this level of technological capability." "You're absolutely correct," Admiral Chen replied. "No species in your experience possesses this capability because no species in your experience has needed to develop it. The Dominion's approach to galactic governance creates civilizations that think in terms of linear force escalation. You build bigger guns, so we build bigger shields. You deploy larger fleets, so we construct more powerful fortifications. It's a paradigm that encourages incremental advancement within established parameters." The human admiral paused, and when she continued, her voice carried a weight that made Admiral Korthak's warrior instincts scream warnings. "But humanity was forced to think beyond those parameters. We couldn't build bigger guns because we didn't have the resources. We couldn't deploy larger fleets because we didn't have the ships. So we had to ask a different question. What if the entire concept of bigger guns and larger fleets was obsolete? What Admiral Chen was describing was the core of the Prometheus doctrine made manifest. Humanity had not just developed new technologies, They had developed new ways of thinking about technology, warfare, and existence itself. The weapons the Dominion faced were not more powerful versions of familiar tools. They were expressions of completely alien approaches to the fundamental nature of reality. The dimensional folding that had scattered the Dominion fleet was just the beginning. As Admiral Chen continued her explanation, she demonstrated capabilities that challenged the Dominion's understanding of what conscious beings could achieve. Time dilation fields that made human reactions effectively instantaneous. Probability manipulation that turned enemy advantages into strategic liabilities. Matter reorganization that could transform raw asteroids into functional spacecraft in seconds rather than years. But the most important development, Admiral Chen explained as displays throughout the scattered Dominion fleet showed real-time images of human installations operating at impossible levels of efficiency, was learning to think as a unified consciousness while maintaining individual autonomy. Your species achieved galactic dominance through hierarchy and control. We achieved something you never imagined. Perfect cooperation through perfect freedom. The implications of this statement sent shockwaves through the Dominion command structure. A civilization that could coordinate the actions of billions of individuals without central control, that could make strategic decisions at the speed of thought and implement them with the precision of quantum mechanics, was not just more advanced than anything in the galaxy. It was evolved beyond anything the galaxy's rulers had considered possible. High Chancellor Vex's response to Admiral Korthak's reports was immediate and absolute. Impossible. Deploy the Omega weapons. If these humans have developed some kind of advanced defensive technology, we'll use weapons that operate outside the normal parameters of space-time. Nothing can defend against reality restructuring devices. The Omega weapons were the Dominion's ultimate expression of technological power. Devices that could literally rewrite the laws of physics within limited areas, making it possible to destroy targets by changing the fundamental constants that allowed them to exist. They had been used only twice in galactic history, both times to eliminate species that had posed existential threats to Dominion authority. When Admiral Korthak received authorization to deploy Omega weapons, he felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. Relief because these weapons represented absolute power. Nothing in the known universe could resist reality restructuring technology. Apprehension because using such weapons represented an escalation that could have consequences throughout the galaxy. Omega weapons materialized in the Sol system through fold space technology similar to what the humans had demonstrated, but operating on principles that the Dominion understood completely. The weapons locked onto Earth and began their reality restructuring sequence, preparing to change the fundamental constants of physics in Earth's immediate vicinity to values that would make matter itself impossible. What happened next would become the subject of frantic study in research institutions throughout the galaxy. The Omega weapons activated successfully, their reality restructuring fields expanding exactly as designed. But instead of destroying Earth, they encountered something unprecedented. A localized region of space-time where the laws of physics were already being actively rewritten by a more sophisticated version of the same technology. Humanity had not just developed defensive measures against reality restructuring. They had learned to restructure reality proactively, creating zones where the fundamental constants of physics operated according to human design rather than natural law. The Omega weapons found themselves trying to impose Dominion physics on a region of space that was already operating under human physics, and the result was a cascade failure that disabled the weapons and sent massive feedback pulses back through the fold space deployment system. The feedback reached Admiral Korthak's scattered fleet simultaneously, disabling their fold space generators and leaving them stranded at their scattered positions throughout the galaxy. More ominously, the pulse reached the Dominion capital itself, causing temporary failures in critical systems and demonstrating that humanity's reach now extended throughout the galaxy. Admiral Chen's final message to the Dominion leadership was delivered directly to High Chancellor Vex's High's private chambers, bypassing every security system in the galactic capital. Chancellor! Her voice carried no trace of the deference that had characterized human communications for 50 years. Your Omega weapons have been disabled, and their deployment systems neutralized. Your fleet has been scattered but not destroyed, as we have no interest in unnecessary casualties. However, we want to make our position absolutely clear. Humanity will no longer recognize Dominion authority in any form. Any further military action against human interests will be met with responses that will fundamentally alter the balance of power in this galaxy. The Chancellor's immediate impulse was to dismiss this threat as impossible, but the evidence of human capabilities was now undeniable. A species that could neutralize Omega weapons and disable Dominion fleets without apparent effort possessed power beyond anything in recorded galactic history. "What do you want?" he asked. And the question represented the first time in 3 millennia that a Dominion leader had asked rather than demanded. "We want recognition of human sovereignty over all territories we choose to occupy," Admiral Chen replied. "We want an end to the monitoring stations and restrictions that were imposed without our consent. Most importantly, we want it understood that any species that wishes to follow humanity's path toward true independence will be considered under human protection." The last point was the most revolutionary. Humanity was not just claiming independence for themselves. They were offering to help other species achieve similar liberation from Dominion control. It was a direct challenge to the entire galactic order, and Chancellor Vexahai understood immediately that accepting it would mean the beginning of the end of Dominion supremacy. "And if we refuse?" he asked. Admiral Chen's response was delivered with the calm certainty of someone stating an inevitable natural law. "Chancellor, you've already seen what we can accomplish when we're trying to avoid casualties and minimize disruption. We've scattered your most powerful fleet and neutralized your most advanced weapons while causing no permanent damage and harming no one. If you force us to abandon those constraints, the mathematics of the situation will change dramatically. The implications hung in the air like a quantum field of pure possibility. Humanity had demonstrated power beyond galactic norms while maintaining ethical standards that the Dominion itself had abandoned centuries ago. They could have destroyed the Dominion fleet entirely, could have turned the Omega weapons against their creators, could have reduced the galactic capital to component atoms. Instead, they had chosen to demonstrate restraint while making their capabilities unmistakably clear. It was a display of strength that transcended mere military power and entered the realm of moral authority. For the first time in millennia, the Galactic Dominion faced an opponent that was not just more powerful, but more evolved in every meaningful sense. The revolution had begun, and its mathematics favored those who had learned to transcend the equations of conventional power. Part 3. The New Mathematics of Existence. 6 months after what historians would later call the Terra demonstration, the galaxy found itself in a state of fundamental transformation. The scattered Dominion fleet had been returned to their home territories with full tactical reports of their encounter, spreading the reality of human capabilities throughout every corner of galactic civilization. The response was unprecedented. For the first time in recorded history, multiple species were simultaneously petitioning to leave the Galactic Dominion. Chancellor Vexay stood in his crystalline throne room, reviewing reports that read like a catalogue of imperial collapse. The Zalani Collective had declared independence and established a defensive alliance with humanity. The Korthani Republic had withdrawn from all Dominion military agreements and begun implementing what they called Terra-inspired governance structures. Most disturbing of all, 17 separate species had formally requested human assistance in achieving technological and cultural liberation from hierarchical control systems. Each petition contained language that would have been unthinkable just months earlier. "We no longer recognize the legitimacy of external authority over our internal affairs. We reject the paradigm of submission in exchange for protection. And most revolutionary of all, we claim the right to evolve beyond the limitations imposed by others." The phrases were clearly derived from human political philosophy, but they had been adapted by each species to reflect their own cultural values and aspirations. Humanity had not imposed a single model of liberation on the galaxy. Instead, they had demonstrated that liberation itself was possible and allowed each species to discover their own path toward it. Elena Vasquez materialized in the Terra Network's primary council chamber, her consciousness linked simultaneously to research facilities on 17 different worlds where human advisors were working with newly independent species to develop technologies and social structures that had never existed before. The work was exhausting and exhilarating in equal measure. Helping entire civilizations transcend limitations that had defined them for millennia required constant innovation and adaptation. "Status report on the collective development projects," Admiral Chen requested as she joined the session through her own quantum interface. The information flowed through the network with the instantaneous clarity that had become humanity's standard mode of communication. Over 400 worlds were now participating in what humans called the Liberation Matrix, a galaxy-spanning network of independent but cooperating civilizations that had rejected hierarchical control in favor of voluntary association based on mutual benefit and shared values. The technological achievements emerging from this cooperation were staggering. The Zalani, freed from Dominion restrictions on their natural biotechnology talents, had developed organic computers that could process quantum calculations at the cellular level. The Korthani, no longer required to focus their energy on military submissions to Dominion authority, had created art forms that existed in 17 dimensions simultaneously. Species after species was discovering capabilities they never knew they possessed, abilities that had been suppressed by millennia of being forced to think and act within Dominion-approved parameters. But the most remarkable development was not technological but philosophical. The galaxy was witnessing the emergence of what human scholars termed post-hierarchical consciousness, ways of thinking and being that transcended the fundamental assumption that intelligent beings must be organized in systems of dominance and submission. The Dominion's response to these developments had evolved from outright military aggression to increasingly desperate attempts at negotiation. Chancellor Bexahay had requested formal diplomatic contact with human leadership 17 times in the past month, each message containing progressively more significant concessions. The most recent communication had offered humanity full membership in the Dominion with unprecedented autonomy and authority over human territories. Admiral Chen's response had been characteristic in its directness. Chancellor, you still don't understand what you're dealing with. We're not seeking a better position within your system. We've moved beyond your system entirely. This was the core insight that Dominion leadership struggled to comprehend. Humanity had not simply developed superior military technology or achieved greater economic efficiency. They had transcended the entire conceptual framework within which galactic civilization had operated for millennia. The idea of membership in a galactic government had become as obsolete to human thinking as monarchy had been to their democratic ancestors. The philosophical revolution was exemplified in humanity's approach to what they called voluntary association networks. Instead of joining existing galactic institutions, humans and their allies were creating entirely new forms of organization based on principles that had never been tested at interstellar scales. These networks operated without central authority, yet achieved coordination that surpassed anything in galactic history. They functioned without military enforcement, yet maintained security that made traditional defense systems obsolete. Most remarkably, they grew stronger with each new member rather than becoming more complex and unwieldy, because they were based on enhancement of individual capability rather than management of collective behavior. The economic implications alone were revolutionary. Species operating within voluntary association networks were achieving levels of prosperity and technological development that made Dominion member worlds look impoverished by comparison. Resources were allocated based on actual need and capability rather than hierarchical position. Innovation was driven by genuine problem-solving rather than competition for approval from superiors. The result was an explosion of creativity and productivity that benefited every participant. But perhaps the most significant change was in the realm of consciousness itself. Species that had spent millennia thinking in terms of limitation and scarcity were discovering the psychology of abundance and possibility. Civilizations that had organized themselves around fear of external threats were learning to think in terms of creative collaboration with potential allies. The transformation was not without its challenges. Several species struggled with the transition from hierarchical to voluntary organization. Others found the psychological freedom overwhelming after centuries of having their major decisions made by external authorities. Most difficult of all was learning to think beyond the win-lose paradigm that had dominated galactic relationships for so long. Human advisors worked with each species to develop transition strategies appropriate to their particular circumstances and psychology. The hegemony worlds, accustomed to rigid military structure, were helped to create disciplined voluntary organizations that maintained their cultural values while eliminating coercive hierarchy. The peaceful meditation cultures were assisted in developing technologies that allowed them to maintain their contemplative traditions while participating fully in galactic affairs. The key insight that guided all of these efforts was humanity's discovery that true strength came not from the ability to control others, but from the ability to transcend the need for control. This principle, which had been learned through humanity's own transformation from a weak, supplicating species to a galactic power, became the foundation for what scholars were beginning to call the post-Dominion era. The tipping point came when the Dominion's own founding species, the ancient Valthari Empire, formally requested assistance in transitioning to voluntary association status. Emperor Zirion himself, the same individual who had originally dismissed humanity's petition for membership, transmitted a message directly to Admiral Chen that represented the complete inversion of their original relationship. "Admiral Chen," the Emperor's message began, "and the use of human honorifics rather than Valkyrie imperial protocols was itself a revolutionary act. The Valkyrie Empire has concluded that our current governmental structure no longer serves the needs of our people or our aspirations for continued development. We formally request assistance from human advisors in transitioning to a voluntary association model that will allow us to participate as equals in the liberation matrix." The request represented the final collapse of the ideological foundation upon which the galactic dominion had been built. If the founding species no longer believed in hierarchical control as the basis for interstellar civilization, then the entire system had lost its legitimacy. Admiral Chen's response was delivered publicly, transmitted simultaneously to every world in the galaxy. "Emperor Zirion, humanity accepts your request and welcomes the Valkyrie people as partners in the continuing evolution of galactic consciousness. We want to make clear that this transition is not about humans replacing the Dominion as a controlling authority. This is about all conscious beings learning to transcend the need for controlling authorities entirely." The philosophical sophistication of this position was unprecedented in galactic history. Humanity had achieved ultimate power, the ability to reshape galactic civilization according to their will, and had chosen to use that power to eliminate the very concept of ultimate power. They were demonstrating the final stage of the Prometheus doctrine, the recognition that true strength meant making strength itself unnecessary. The practical implementation of this philosophy required innovations that pushed even human capabilities to their limits. Creating governmental structures that functioned without coercive authority required technologies that could coordinate billions of conscious beings while respecting the autonomy of each individual. Maintaining security without military hierarchy required defensive systems that could operate based on voluntary cooperation rather than centralized command. Most challenging of all, ensuring prosperity without economic exploitation required resource allocation systems that could balance individual needs with collective capabilities across thousands of worlds and hundreds of species. The solutions that emerged were uniquely suited to each species while operating on principles that were universal. The Valkyrie developed what they called consensual imperium, a governmental system that maintained their cultural preference for imperial aesthetics while basing all authority on continuously renewed voluntary consent. The Zilani created biological democracy that used their biotechnology to create literal neural networks linking their population in decision-making processes. Each solution was different, but all were based on the fundamental principle that conscious beings could govern themselves without external coercion if they were given the tools and freedom to do so. High Chancellor Vexay's final message to the galaxy was broadcast from the Dominion capital as the last remaining hierarchical institution dissolved into voluntary association networks. "To all conscious beings throughout the galaxy, the Galactic Dominion hereby dissolves all claims to authority over any species or world. This decision is made in recognition that the evolution of consciousness has reached a point where external control is not only unnecessary, but counterproductive to the continued development of intelligent life." The message continued, with an admission that represented the complete transformation of galactic thinking. "We have learned from humanity that true power lies not in the ability to dominate others, but in the ability to enhance the capabilities of all conscious beings. The age of hierarchical control is ending. The age of voluntary cooperation is beginning." The formal end of the Dominion was celebrated throughout the galaxy not as a victory of one power over another, but as a liberation that benefited every conscious being. Worlds that had been suppressed for centuries suddenly found themselves free to explore their full potential. Species that had been forced into narrow roles discovered talents and capabilities they had never been allowed to develop. Most importantly, the galaxy's children, the newer species that had never known anything but Dominion control, found themselves inheriting a universe of unlimited possibility. The celebration on Earth was subdued but profound. Humanity had achieved something unprecedented. They had used ultimate power to eliminate the need for ultimate power. They had conquered the galaxy by teaching it to conquer itself. Admiral Chen's final log entry captured the essence of what humanity had accomplished. "We set out to prove that conscious beings need not accept limitations imposed by others. We have succeeded beyond our wildest imagination. But our greatest achievement is not what we have gained. It is what we have made unnecessary. We have proven that the strong need not dominate the weak, because we have eliminated the categories of strong and weak entirely. Every conscious being is now free to discover what they can become when they are truly free to become it. The galaxy that emerged from humanity's revolution bore little resemblance to the hierarchical civilization that had existed for millennia. It was a place where species cooperated by choice rather than compulsion, where innovation was driven by curiosity rather than competition, where strength was measured by the ability to enhance others rather than control them. The transformation was not without its ongoing challenges. Learning to think and act without hierarchical structures required constant innovation and adaptation. Some individuals and even entire worlds struggled with the psychological demands of complete freedom. But these challenges were met with the same spirit that had driven humanity's original transformation. The recognition that growth required the willingness to destroy one's weak self in order to become something greater. The Prometheus doctrine had achieved its ultimate expression, a galaxy where every conscious being understood that the man who destroys his weak self can never be destroyed by others, because they had learned to transcend both weakness and the need for destruction. They had discovered that true strength lay not in the ability to survive in a hostile universe, but in the ability to transform that universe into a place where survival was replaced by flourishing, where competition was replaced by collaboration, and where the ancient dream of conscious beings, to be truly free, had finally become reality. In the end, humanity's greatest gift to the galaxy was not their technology or their military prowess, but their demonstration that evolution was possible, that conscious beings need not accept the limitations of their circumstances or their nature. They had shown that with sufficient will and wisdom, any species could transcend not just their weaknesses, but the entire framework of weakness and strength that had defined existence for so long. The galaxy was no longer a place where the strong ruled the weak. It had become something unprecedented in the history of consciousness, a place where all beings could become strong, and where strength itself was defined not by the ability to dominate, but by the capacity to elevate all life to its highest potential. The revolution was complete, not because humanity had won, but because they had made winning unnecessary. The mathematics of existence had been fundamentally altered, and the new equations favored not the survival of the fittest, but the flourishing of all.